You're kneeling in your driveway at 6:52 on a Saturday morning, elbow deep in a lawnmower engine that won't start. Your phone buzzes against the concrete. An email. Subject line, Q2 Consolidated Net Worth Statement. You wipe your hands on your jeans and open it. The number your accountant has been building toward for months finally lands. You've crossed $650 million. You read it once. Then again. Then you set the phone face down on the grass and go back to the carburetor. No call. Nothing on your face changes. Nothing about your life looks like $650 million. You drive a Toyota Highlander with 88,000 miles and a crack in the windshield you keep forgetting to fix. This morning, before that email, you spent 40 minutes doing the same manual work you've done for years. Work you technically don't need to do anymore. Here's the loop that's been running under everything for years. The number in your head and the number other people see have never matched. Not once. Not by accident, either. By design. What sits behind that number isn't a windfall, a single lucky bet, or an inheritance. It's a structure, assembled piece by piece over more than a decade, most of it too small and too boring for anyone to think twice about. Years ago, you watched someone close borrow heavily to look successful, then quietly lose control of everything. That's the moment you decided to build in the opposite direction, unseen and on purpose. If that number has never matched what people see, comment quiet below and subscribe to follow what happens when this structure gets tested. Because the first piece of this structure didn't look like wealth at all. It looked like a broken machine nobody wanted to fix. The machine sits outside a self-serve car wash 2 blocks from your apartment. A coin-operated vacuum, the kind that eats quarters and blows dust out of trunk mats, still broken. You've walked past it for 6 days straight, and for 6 days straight, it has worn the same handwritten out-of-order sign, the tape curling up at the corners in the heat. The first day, you're annoyed, in the small, forgettable way anyone is annoyed by a broken machine. By day 4, the annoyance sharpens into something closer to disbelief. How does a business let something sit broken for that long, on a street this busy, without anyone driving over to fix it? By day 6, the irritation has quietly turned into a different question, one that has nothing to do with getting your trunk vacuumed. Somebody owns this thing. Somebody is losing money every single day it sits there, and they either don't know or don't care enough to check. That question follows you home. It takes about 35 minutes to get an answer. A business license search, a name on a permit filing, one short phone call where you ask about leasing a spot just to get someone talking. The machine belongs to a man running a small, unglamorous route, roughly 10 machines like this one, spread across 2 towns, mostly bolted outside car washes and laundromats. He doesn't call it a business, exactly. When you ask how it's going, he just says fine, the way someone describes a chore they stopped thinking about years ago. You do the math anyway, because at this point you can't not. Each machine nets somewhere between $30 and $90 a month, after maintenance and whatever cut the location owner takes off the top. $90. Not a number that changes a life. Barely a number you'd bring up at dinner. Except that's exactly why it caught your attention in the first place. Nobody drives across town to inspect $90. Nobody brags about it, tracks it, or writes about it. It just sits there on a sidewalk, quietly earning, whether anyone is watching it or not, including the man who owns 10 of them and still calls the whole thing fine. What actually changes something in you isn't the amount, it's the shape of it. Because until that Thursday, you had never really separated money from your presence. A paycheck needs you to show up. A side hustle needs you to answer messages, deliver something, be somewhere. This machine needs none of that. It sits on a sidewalk and earns while you're asleep, at your desk or 3 states away, and nobody watching it would ever guess it belongs to anyone at all. You don't tell anyone about this. There's one person you'd normally call with something like this. You don't. The next morning, you clock in at the same desk job, at the same hour, same as every other Thursday. As far as your co-workers know, nothing about you has changed. On the surface, that's true. But something has opened that wasn't open 6 days ago. A question that won't close itself back up. If a stranger can own 10 of these and barely think about them, what happens if someone builds this on purpose, instead of stumbling into it by accident? You don't decide to build anything close to an empire. Not yet. You decide something smaller, something easy enough to justify to yourself. You're going to buy exactly 1 machine, just to find out if the math holds up when it's your money on the line instead of a stranger's. Not the coin-op vacuum outside your building, either. That one already has an owner who's clearly stopped caring, but hasn't stopped owning it. A different one, a different street, someone else just as tired of thinking about theirs. That someone turns out to be a woman running a single vacuum outside a different car wash, tired enough of the whole thing that she agrees to sell it to you right there in the parking lot. Cash, no paperwork beyond a receipt scrawled on the back of a gas station napkin. $650. You shake on a 20% cut for the car wash owner, and that's the entire contract. A handshake, and her phone number in case anything breaks. For the first 2 weeks, you check on it more than you'd like to admit. Driving past on your lunch break, watching quarters go in, feeling something close to pride the first time you see a stranger actually use it. By the end of the month, you empty the coin box yourself for the first time. $110 in gross revenue, sitting in a plastic bag on your passenger seat. After the car wash is cut, after gas for the 2 trips to check on it, after a $10 part you replace yourself, you're left with $72. $72. Your coworker picked up one Saturday shift last month and made more than that in 6 hours. If you told her the number, she'd probably laugh. Not out of cruelty, just because $72 sounds like nothing next to a real paycheck. For a second, she's not wrong. Standing there with a bag of quarters, you almost agree with her, except that $72 didn't ask you to show up for 6 hours. It didn't need you in a specific place, at a specific time, performing a specific task someone else assigned you. It happened while you were at your desk job, asleep, at your sister's birthday dinner. Completely unaware, a stranger was vacuuming out their trunk 2 towns over. That's the number that actually matters, not the $72 itself, but the fact that it arrived without asking anything of you at all. So you do the math again, the way you can't seem to stop doing lately. One machine nets somewhere around $72 a month once you average in a bad one. 5 machines, at that same rate. Roughly $360 a month. 10, around $720. 20, if you're smarter about locations than the woman who sold you your first one. Closer to $1,100, maybe $1,500 a month, in the kind of towns where car washes and laundromats never quite run out of customers. None of those numbers replace a salary. Not yet, but none of them ask for your hours either. And that's the part nobody else seems to be doing math on. Walk into any of these places and ask the manager who owns the vacuum out front, and most of them will just shrug. It's a fixture, something that was already there when they started working there, like the ice machine or the air pump. Nobody looks at a coin-op vacuum and thinks, someone bought that on purpose and is quietly getting richer while I'm not looking. You start to notice how many of these fixtures exist within 20 minutes of your apartment. Vacuums, air pumps, a couple of claw machines nobody's refilled in months, each one small enough to ignore, invisible enough that its owner, if it even has one who's paying attention, never comes up in conversation. You start keeping a note on your phone. Not a business plan, nothing that formal, just addresses and observations. West Side Laundromat, 2 air machines, no visible owner, gas station off Route 9, claw machine full of stuffed animals nobody's touched in a year. Within 3 weeks, the list has 11 entries. You haven't bought a single one of them. You're just practicing seeing something that was always there. At the office, nobody asks where you disappear to on lunch breaks. They wouldn't guess it's for a list of vending machines. But even as you start circling addresses on a mental map, a different thought settles in, quieter than the excitement. None of this scales the way you actually want it to. A coin-op vacuum depends on somebody deciding to get their car washed that particular week. It's real cash flow, and it's real proof the model works. Real, but fragile in a way you can't quite ignore. It's not the kind of demand that holds steady, no matter what the economy is doing. If you're going to build something that survives a bad year, you need an asset people need regardless of their mood, their budget, or the weather. Something people can't simply decide to skip. Package delivery is the closest thing you can find to that. Nobody skips getting their packages. Not in a recession, not during a rate hike, not when everyone swears they're cutting back. They just complain about the delivery guy and order the thing anyway. So when you hear that a woman named Elena is quietly retiring after 19 years of managing a cluster of 6 private parcel lockers bolted into an apartment lobby across town, you don't wait for someone else to notice first. Elena isn't trying to make a big sale out of it. She built the setup slowly, one building manager relationship at a time, and now she just wants to stop carrying the keys around. $52,000 for all 6 units, tenant contracts included. You do the arithmetic before you even finish the tour. First-year net comes out to around $4,200. Call it an 8% return on what you put in. You'd be lying if you said that number didn't sting a little after the version of this story where you imagined something closer to life-changing. $4,200 isn't a headline. It's not the kind of number that makes anyone's jaw drop at a dinner party, assuming you were the type to bring it up at one. But here's what that modest, slightly disappointing 8% actually teaches you, in a way the vacuum route never quite could. A small, steady stream of cash, one that doesn't need you standing next to it, can be priced. It has a value that isn't just whatever I feel like it's worth. It's a real number, tied to a real return, the same math that prices a 100-unit apartment building or a downtown office tower. Once you can price something that's small and boring correctly, there's no real ceiling on the size of thing you can apply that same math to next. A strip of retail units. A self-storage facility. A small office floor someone's unloading because they're retiring, or in a hurry, exactly like Eleanor. The lockers aren't the destination. They're the first proof that the pricing logic actually holds. That's around the same time you start seeing an accountant named Priya, 22 years in the business, not the type who's impressed by much of anything. She's the one who finally puts a name and a spreadsheet to what you've quietly assembled. The vacuum, the lockers, the growing list of addresses still sitting untouched in your phone. Somewhere in the middle of reconciling receipts, she asks you something you genuinely haven't thought about. If you weren't here one day to explain any of this, who would know it existed? And how would they find out? No answer comes. Not a good one, anyway. Because up until that question, nobody knows had only ever felt like a strength. No attention, no envy, no one asking to borrow against it or warning you it's too risky. What Priya's question does, without meaning to, is pull a thread you hadn't noticed was loose. Not in the assets themselves. Those have documentation, receipts, paper trails clean enough for any audit. But in the space around them. The decisions that led to each one. The logic you used to price them. The sequence of phone calls and parking lots and handshakes that added up to something, and that currently exist only in your head. You ask her to flag anything in the reconciliation she can't trace to a written record. She comes back 2 days later with a short list. 6 items, none of them large, all of them requiring you to be in the room to explain. You look at it for a while. What doesn't leave isn't the 6 items. Those you can fix. It's the question underneath them. How much of what you've built on purpose would hold up without you there to explain it? You don't find an answer that fits on paper. You go home. Priya's question sits there the rest of that evening, the same way the number on your locker's cap rate sits there. Proof of a principle, not yet applied at the size you can already see coming. At a Thursday all-hands about Q3 targets, you run entirely different numbers in your head. Cap rates, not quotas. Nobody in that room is doing the same math. Nobody in that room would guess you are. If any part of this feels like your own ledger, comment quiet again, but mean it differently this time, not as a shield, but as a method. Subscribe if you want to see what that method looks like the next time someone close to you needs something you could simply hand them. That part is next. The meetup is one you almost skip. A monthly gathering for people circling small commercial real estate, mostly landlords trading war stories about tenants and roof repairs. You go anyway, partly because Priya's question is still sitting in the back of your head like a stone in a shoe, and partly because if you're serious about moving into strip malls and self-storage lots, you should probably know what that world sounds like out loud. It sounds, mostly, like a man in $500 limited edition sneakers, standing a little too close to everyone, talking about his crypto portfolio at a volume meant to be overheard. He's driven a Tesla with a custom decal to a room full of strangers he's never met. Within 4 minutes, 3 people are asking him questions. You, on the other hand, are wearing the same jacket you wore to fix the lawnmower, having arrived in a Toyota Highlander with 88,000 miles and a crack in the windshield you still haven't scheduled anyone to fix. Someone asks what you do. You give a 2-sentence answer about some rental properties, and the conversation moves on to someone louder within about 90 seconds. That's not a loss. That's the plan working exactly as designed. You've gotten good at this, good enough that it doesn't sting anymore, watching attention land on someone else's number instead of yours. What you're less prepared for is the version of invisibility that has nothing to do with strangers at a meetup and everything to do with someone who actually knows you. Daniel's had the same bakery for 3 years now. The The kind of place where regulars have a usual order and he still remembers it after they've been away for 2 weeks. He calls you, not to ask for anything at first, just to talk through the math on a second location he's been circling for months. $60,000. He says the number, the way people say numbers they've already decided are out of reach. You could send him that number tonight. Not as a loan, not as an investment, just sent. It wouldn't move your portfolio in any direction anyone would notice, including you 3 months from now. For about 4 seconds, sitting on your couch with your phone in your hand, that's exactly what you're tempted to do. You don't do it. Instead, you ask him to send over his lease terms and his supplier contracts, and you spend the next several Saturday mornings at his kitchen table instead of anyone's office, going through both line by line. Half the problems turn out to be numbers Daniel had never actually double-checked. A supplier fee that's been quietly inflated for a year, a lease clause that's more negotiable than he assumed. The other half point you both toward a local small business loan program neither of you had heard of before you went looking. $45,000 at a rate that actually makes sense. 5 weeks later, Daniel signs the lease on the second location. He does it on his own signature, backed by his own numbers, on his own loan. No wire transfer from you anywhere in the paperwork. What you've actually given him isn't money. It's proof that the math behind his bakery holds up on its own, without needing you to prop up a single line of it. Which means the next time a number scares him, he'll know how to sit down and take it apart instead of assuming it's out of reach, from where anyone else stands. His landlord, his supplier, the loan officer who approved him. You're just a friend who came around on Saturdays. Nothing more. Nobody involved in that lease has any reason to suspect you could have ended the entire negotiation with one transfer and never noticed the difference. That should feel like enough. For most of the drive home, it does. And then, sitting in the parking lot outside your own building, keys already in your hand, you notice you're not actually reaching for the door yet. You're just sitting there, engine off, with a feeling you can't immediately name. Not quite the pride you expected, not quite anything you'd call sad, either. It feels like holding a door open for a long time and realizing no one behind you is really looking at who's holding it. You don't chase the feeling down that night. You have work in the morning, same as always. And Daniel's already texted a photo of the signed lease with 3 exclamation points. You know, he means completely. But the feeling doesn't fully leave. Underneath it, quieter, Priya's question from weeks ago is still there. The one you still haven't answered, starting to feel less like something you can keep postponing and more like something that's already choosing a deadline, whether you pick one or not. That deadline ends up choosing itself, in a way, on a Saturday morning a few months later, kneeling in your driveway at 6:52, elbow deep in the same lawnmower engine that's given you trouble every spring for years when your phone buzzes against the concrete. An email. Subject line, Q2 Consolidated Net Worth Statement. You already know, from the first line, what the number is going to say, roughly. Priya's been walking you toward it for 2 quarters. What you don't expect is the shape of the breakdown underneath it. The vacuum route sits there as a single line, 3 towns now, still spitting out a few $100s a month, filed under a category Priya's labeled, half-joking, legacy. The parcel lockers get 1 line too. Bigger, still modest, still the same steady 8-ish% it's always been. Everything above that, page after page of it, is retail strips, self-storage facilities, small office floors, bought the way Eleanor's lockers were bought, from people retiring, people in a hurry, people who wanted out and didn't want to negotiate hard. That's where the actual number lives. That's what crosses $650 million. You read it once, then again. Then you set the phone face down on the grass, exactly the way you did that morning months ago when the number first landed, and go back to the carburetor. No call, nothing on your face changes. That number, $650 million, confirmed on paper, every line of it real, is still sitting in your pocket when Priya calls back 20 minutes later. There's a tone in her voice you haven't heard from her before. One of the older assets has hit a snag. The car wash that hosts your original vacuum route just changed hands, and the new ownership group has no interest in honoring an arrangement that was never more than a handshake and a napkin receipt 11 years ago. They're giving you 30 days to either formalize a new contract on their terms or clear the machines out. It's not the biggest asset on the sheet you just read, but it's the oldest, and it's the one every dollar since has quietly depended on being real. This is the actual test. Not of the money, but of the premise. For 11 years, you've built on the idea that a small, boring, barely documented asset can still be a real, ownable, valuable thing, whether or not anyone else recognizes it as one. Now a stranger with a signature and a lawyer is saying, in effect, prove it. You don't panic, and you don't call Priya back in a hurry to say so. You call a lawyer you've used twice before, lay out the timeline in about 4 minutes, and let him make the first move. 3 short calls later, spread across a week, you've got a new contract. Less favorable than the old handshake, but a real one this time, on paper, and you keep roughly 80% of what the location was worth to you before. Nothing about the $650 million actually changes. What changes is quieter than that. You now know, in a way you only half believed before, that what you built doesn't fall apart the first time someone actually leans on it. That's the part that finally answers the question this story could never answer if nothing had ever actually tested it. The number was never really the point. It was always going to be the part everyone fixates on, the part with the most zeros, the easiest thing to react to. But $650 million was never one decision, one deal, one lucky break that could just as easily have gone the other way. It was hundreds of small ones, most of them worth less than a weekend shift, most of them invisible, even to you at the time you made them. A broken vacuum you didn't walk past, a locker cluster you didn't overpay for, a Saturday you spent at Daniel's kitchen table instead of sending a transfer that would have felt so much easier. None of those decisions, taken alone, is worth mentioning to anyone. Put together, over 11 years, they're worth more than most companies. That's the actual paradox this video opened with, even if it didn't say so out loud. The number was never the impressive part. The architecture underneath it is, and the entire architecture was built, on purpose, to keep working whether or not a single other person ever found out it existed. That calm on your face in the driveway, the one that never cracked even while a number like that landed on a Saturday morning. It was never indifference. It was just what 11 years of small, unremarkable decisions eventually starts to feel like from the inside. Not a lightning strike, but the slow, quiet arrival of something you'd already, one Tuesday at a time, decided to build. Which is exactly the moment Priya's old question finally catches up to you. The one she asked at her kitchen table years ago, back when the number was a fraction of what it is now. If you weren't here to explain any of this, who would know it existed? And how would they find out? You'd let that question go quiet, the same way you let everything else go quiet, and only now do you realize that was never actually an answer. It was just a very long pause. Because the real cost of this kind of life was never the loneliness people assume comes with hiding something this size. You've had Daniel and Priya and enough ordinary Tuesdays to not feel that particular loss. The real cost is subtler. Silence that works well enough for long enough can outlast the reason you started it and quietly cut you off from the exact people it was supposed to protect. So the question stops being, how do I make sure nobody ever finds out? It becomes something closer to, when and to whom do I choose to be known? Before that choice gets made for me, by an accident, a lawsuit, or a locked phone nobody else has the password to. For now, sitting there with the lawnmower finally running again, you don't have the answer yet. Just the certainty, for the first time, that you're the one who gets to write it. Writing it starts, oddly enough, with the same objects that opened this entire story. The lawnmower engine you were fixing when the number first landed. Still just a lawnmower, still cranky every April, still nothing anyone driving past your house would look at twice. The Toyota Highlander with the cracked windshield you never got around to fixing, because fixing it never once affected anything that actually mattered. The room full of louder people at that meetup who never once found out what you drive home to. None of that was ever really camouflage, not in the way it might have looked from the outside. A disguise is something you put on to hide from a threat. What you built was closer to a choice you kept renewing, morning after ordinary morning, for 11 years. Not because you were scared of being seen, but because you hadn't yet decided on what terms you wanted to be. You're not the person who happened to end up with $650 million. You're the person who spent 11 years choosing, again and again, to be underestimated on purpose. The parking lot handshake instead of the headline deal, the kitchen table instead of the wire transfer, the same cracked windshield instead of a car that announced anything. That's the identity underneath the number, the one nobody at that meetup, or your office, or even Daniel, ever quite saw in full. And it's the one part of all this that was never an accident. What's worth sitting with longer than the number itself is this. $650 million never arrived in one moment big enough to notice. It arrived in hundreds of small ones. A machine you didn't walk past, a modest 8% you didn't dismiss, a Saturday you gave to a friend instead of a transfer. And the silence around all of it only stays worth anything for as long as you're the one deciding when it ends. Not a lawsuit, not an accident, not somebody finding a shoebox of paperwork by chance. If any part of this sounded like your own math, your own quiet decisions nobody's tallying up yet, comment "quiet" one more time and mean it a little differently than you did at the start of this video. Not as a badge, but as a decision still in progress. Like the video, subscribe if you want to see what happens when this structure actually gets asked to open. And before you close this tab, do the one thing Priya's question was really asking for. Write down a single, specific condition. One milestone, one person, one moment. When you'll choose to let part of what you've built become visible, instead of leaving that choice to whoever finds it after you.